Hello and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about topics related to running role-playing games. I'm Chris Salzman.
And I'm Andy Rao.
Andy, I'm back, and I want to say a special thank you to John and Tim, who came on the podcast last time to cover for me while I was laid out with COVID, trying to maintain some semblance of life and living.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I was all cagey about why you were not recording, because I didn't know how much medical detail you wish to share, but at this time in history, I think we can all assume it's COVID, or else you're, I don't know, undercover in Europe somewhere.
Yeah, that's what I learned this time about having COVID, is that if you don't say what's going on with you, everybody just assumes that it's COVID. But if you say what's going on with you, everybody asks, like, but is it also COVID? So it's quite fun. We have done in the United States just an absolute terrible job with communication about COVID all around, including our direct communication with our friends and family about what's going on.
So, Chris, I got to ask: do you listen to podcasts when you're not able to have recorded, or did you listen to that episode?
Yes, I did listen to this last episode. I kind of figured, because it was nominally my podcast, I should probably know what happened on it. It was super fun. So for those who didn't listen to the last episode, Tim came on and opened up a surprise box from Palladium, which was just like a delight listening to that. And then y'all had a good conversation as well. So it was super cool. And I mean, it's also, there's somewhat a little bit of pride about being able to listen to your own podcast and being like, oh, it didn't all fall apart just because I was gone for an episode.
Is that pride, or is that a deeply depressing experience when you realize I'm not that necessary?
Yeah, I mean, it is somewhat depressing, and they're like, okay, I'm not maybe I should be sick more often. I don't know. Maybe it was the best episode we've had in years.
Well, anyway, glad to have you back, Chris. Yes.
Yeah. So Andy, you had mentioned you had a couple things that you wanted to talk about. I've got something that I want to bring up too. But yeah, why don't you go ahead with your stuff?
Sure. All right. So, Chris, we're going to talk about zombies for a minute.
Finally.
Yeah,
okay.
Finally. Now that Halloween is well past us, I'm going to bring up a horror topic to talk about. So I was surprised in the mail the other day to get the Walking Dead RPG from a Kickstarter I had kickstarted and then kind of forgotten about, and I guess missed the emails. So that was a pleasant surprise.
It's weird how this keeps happening to you and me and all sorts of our friends, where it's so.
Well, it's been nice because my budget this year for fun game stuff is way lower than it's been in the past. But I seeded a bunch of Kickstarters 2 or 3 years ago that are now coming due. So I'm still getting the same influx of games I don't need and will never play. But
yes.
So, all right. Well, so my topic is, I've been flipping through that Walking Dead RPG. Looks pretty neat. And I've also been, to kind of get in the spirit, I've been revisiting the Walking Dead comic and then watching a few scenes from the Walking Dead show just on YouTube, just to kind of remember what it was about this show and stuff that was gripping. Because I used to be into the show. And I have been thinking about two ways that show and some similar shows create drama that I don't know how I would pull off in an RPG, but that feel pretty fundamental to the way that this particular show generates tension and drama. It's not the only show that does this. I think as I talk, I think the Battlestar Galactica TV show pulls some of these tricks. But so if you don't mind if I just jump in, one of the ways that The Walking Dead and similar shows create drama is, most of the drama comes from the people, right? So, as a lot of great horror shows, the horror is kind of this background element. It's lurking in the background, being menacing, but the real tension and drama comes from the decisions that the heroes are making. And
they're terrible, terrible decisions.
Yeah, and what this show and the comic really nail is that people will just always create dumb problems when they don't need to. Now, in role-playing games, there are many role-playing games over the years that have incorporated, personal motivations and personal goals with the specific purpose of having those goals conflict with another character's and create drama in-game. So, like we've talked a lot about the Alien RPG. Everyone has an agenda that they're following, and the expectation is your agenda is going to run into somebody else's agenda, and voila, tension will be created. But in The Walking Dead, it's not that sophisticated. Like, it's not that person A has this, long-term goal they're pursuing, and it gets in the way of somebody else's long-term goal. The problem is, anytime there's just, 5 minutes of peace and quiet, someone does something just stupid. What would be... We've cleared out the zombies, we've established the space, it's all good. All of our problems are gone. All we need to do is just... hit cruise control here and enjoy the good life. That is when person A decides to, fall in love with his best friend's wife. And person B decides that they're jealous of the size of somebody else's room that they got that's slightly bigger than... it's very relatable. When you watch it, it's irritating, but you're also this is probably what would happen. So
I get it. I've had that conversation with my roommate before.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, have you ever seen an RPG that tries to capture that dynamic? I feel like it's almost like you're playing D&D and you hand one character a card that just says do something, just create some stupid problem, right?
Yeah, I mean, most of the time I think players are pretty good at creating their own stupid problems. But I mean, that to me is right, like role-playing games, right? You're kind of always striving towards action. And I've often found when the game isn't quite working, it's because the players aren't really trying to take actions. They're trying to be too safe. They're trying to create that optimal community where everything is sort of sorted out and figured out. And that is fun, but as you alluded to, just human nature, you sort of want to blow that up as soon as you have it, which is not great, right? But that's also sort of where the drama and where the story and stuff comes from. Yeah. So I think I was thinking about the quiet year, right? And part of the quiet year is when you're playing the game, right? You're kind of building the story of a community over the course of the year, and every round you basically flip over a card, and that card is creating a new drama that you have to incorporate into the story, right? Because I think those downtime activities, we're growing corn, we're harvesting the corn, we're we're just going on with life, right?
Yeah.
That isn't super fascinating to watch, right, or to experience as a story, but it is those points of drama. Right, where you do want to be there. You kind of want to see how it's going to shake out and what's going to happen.
Yeah. Do you think that a game like D&D would be more fun if you periodically prodded the group to just, on top of their normal adventuring, if they also had a dumb problem?
Yeah. I think I played, it was a shorter campaign that I was running with D&D. And one of the hooks for the story was that they were trying to establish a trade route between two towns, and specifically an apple trading trading route. It was something pretty low level, right? So they had the threat of this big bad, right, doing all the awful stuff, but at the same time they were also trying to sort of maneuver and figure out that sort of thing. And that can be a fun problem, I think, for certain player types to chew on in the background or to obsess about, right? more likely. Yeah. But yeah, I think there is definitely something to that of you have the overarching story, but then you have these individual, little dumb, silly problems, that are just almost background noise or B stories, right? And in terms of plots, things like that. Yeah.
Well, that ties into the second way that these types of story creates drama that I don't know how I would do in RPG, and that is that the disasters often start during what we would call the downtime of the story, not the exciting parts of the story. So, in Walking Dead, for example, and I think we could think of a lot of other examples, there are action scenes where people are shooting each other and karate chopping each other and stuff like that. It's all very exciting. But, that's not where the big disasters start. The big disasters, start, and this is a very effective, as a narrative tool, it's effective, during the downtime when, someone goes out back to take the trash out, and then a zombie that was missed by them earlier bites them, and because they didn't lock the door behind them. The zombies like get into the building, and because they didn't tell someone that they were taking a break or something like that, they're like, the problem isn't noticed the way it would normally be noticed, and then it casts a bunch of mundane things like that cascade into the big action scene of like, now there's zombies all through the building and like we're in serious trouble.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking about that because those scenes, it's very effective to read, and it's very effective to watch the increasing like the threat and the danger just start to balloon because these mundane things kind of add on to each other and make until it's a really big problem. And this is normally the sort of scene I would like skip over in an RPG or relegate at most to like a quick montage. Like, okay, you take the garbage out. You switch the guards. You take care of that mundane stuff or whatever. So I'm just wondering, like, how might you? Do you think that you could pull off that mundane like screw up that cascades in an RPG, or is that just not something an RPG is going to do very well?
That's a really good question. I think there is an element of, like in The Walking Dead, you have a story that's being told from sort of one point of view that you as a reader, right, can't exactly influence necessarily, right? So like those cascading series of events happen even though like maybe if you were as a player, you might have been like, oh, like let's, take care of that before it's a problem.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's why, at least for me, like that's why I would tend to lean towards like, a dragon shows up, right? Like that's something that you can't, it's not like a kobold comes and unlocks a door and then, like opens that up and then they'll get inside and then they flag the dragon down, right? Like there's like, those steps and stuff you can sort of just, skip over. Like you were saying, you just sort of skip over to like the big event, like the big thing. It's not like, one zombie gets in, it's like the horde of zombies rush in.
Right.
And I think like, I think you're onto something there that like the drama and the tension of it being like a slow build is much more fascinating, right? And does sort of ratchet it up. I think there's also like an element of like, oh, if we had noticed that this was happening early on, like we could have stopped it from happening, but like now it's too late. Like now the whole town is overrun and now this like, the cannibal death cult is inside the the community
right
now, right? So like, I think the way you would do it is exactly what you were saying. I think, right? Like maybe like they've just finished some sort of like part of an adventure and it's like they are in a downtime and maybe you just seed in a bunch of like small mundane things that could be hooks into a worse thing happening, right? You know, or like give them too many things, like so they have to make a choice. It's like, oh, like you need to take out the trash and like, right, just like chores, right? You need to take out the trash and like cook dinner and like do this, that, and the other. And it's like, depending on what they choose, then the thing that they didn't do is the thing that brings in.
That's an interesting way to do it. Yeah. Yeah. And, I suppose if you were just kind of faithful about periodically putting the spotlight on a mundane scene or two, you could earn the right and the ability to pull this off, right?
Yeah. I don't think you want to be like, every night it's like, oh, well, you forgot to tell me that you're going to go take out the trash, right? Did you do the take out the trash check or whatever? Yeah. But like, but I mean, I think maybe like, giving them sorts of like little things to think about like that.
Yeah.
It's got to be done in a way too that it doesn't feel like it's like, oh, I gotcha. Like, right. Like there's 5 of you and there's 6 things to do and just whatever one you didn't choose is the one that you got hammered on. But
I wonder if you could, how fun it would be to just invite the PCs to build that out for you. Like say you're the GM, you roll on like the random events table and it's like whatever. The cannibal cult gets into your base, sneaks into your base. What if you... So that's the problem the PCs have to deal with. What if you were then like, okay, how did the cult get in the base? Like, what's the simple mistake at the very top of this chain of events that results in a bunch of cannibals in your base?
Yeah. Oh, that's good, right? Because it's like, if you have players that are bought into the fiction of like, yes, we are playing this game and there's like we sort of want there to be the zombie influx like at some point, like ask them how they want it to happen, like why not? Yeah, I mean, I think you could do lots of fun stuff too. So like, even if it's like, maybe everybody goes off and does chores separately, and then you have that magic moment that every GM wants, which is they've split the party 5 different ways, right?
Yeah,
everybody's doing something different. And it's like, what if every single one of those results in them each one-on-one finding a zombie coming in? It's like, okay, like, what are you going to do? It's like, we can try to call this person over, but like, they also have a zombie,
yeah,
right, that they're dealing with, right? And it's like, okay, so like, there's a bigger threat at hand. So you could almost like, you could take it from like 0 to 100 with all these really small moments pretty fast.
It occurs to me you could combine these two things too. I mean, if you get the players to just kind of throw out a variety of dumb problems that they've created, you could periodically. One of those is going to make for the good, because somebody got in an argument over a chess game with another person. They stormed out and they took the key to the car with them. And now, as a result, you can't, then that caused this problem. And I wonder if you could, if you and the players have been like just throwing drama out from time to time, you would have material as a GM you could grab with and be like, all right, which one of these these dumb problems that we've been creating could I think of a way to lead to the cannibal cult being inside the compound, right?
Yeah, that's okay. We're fully spitballing here, but now I'm wondering about like, introducing a party to a new town. I feel like can be difficult because it's like, like, especially if it's a town that's sort of just like another town, like you've just been in. But you could almost just ask them if you're okay with doing stuff a little bit more narrative focused. It's like, tell me like one thing you notice, one like positive thing you do, and one thing you've done to create drama, right? And it's like you could almost build out a town that way. It's like, yeah, like, I don't know, like I noticed that like this town has like 10 blacksmiths all in a row. Like that's interesting. Like, I went to the tavern and met this cool new NPC, and like, then the bad thing is like, I don't know, like I pissed off the mayor, right? Like, right. Like whatever that is, right? And then you have all those little bits to play with right there. I mean, I think you could even role play out individual elements from that. I mean, like taking sort of a page from Blades in the Dark, which I think does this really well with downtime. Like you can role play those downtime activities of like, yeah, like what does it look like when you go and satisfy your vice? Like, right, like tell me about that, and like then we're gonna roll, and then it goes poorly, and it's like, well, let's narrate that. Like maybe now you have a new enemy NPC out there, right? Because you sort of had to go do this action, it didn't go well. Yeah.
I like it. Okay, good food for thought, Chris. Hey, thanks for indulging me while I kind of talked out my current little zombie phase here on the show. So
yeah, are you going to try to run like a full campaign of The Walking Dead, or you think you're just going to do a one shot? What's your?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't really see. I don't really think I have the players or the opportunity right now to run a campaign.
Yeah.
But I bet I could get some people together for a one shot. So
yeah, that's for sure fun.
Yeah,
I bet you 5 years ago you might have been able to easily get, but I think we're currently the zeitgeist has moved on from zombies a bit right now, but maybe it'll come back.
I am glad that Free League in this case came out with this game, but it's certainly not the first kind of franchised RPG that has come out like 4 to 5 years after the thing was big, and yeah. I totally get it. I mean, it's hard. It's really, really hard to do things quickly in this when you're dealing with the big corporations that own story copyrights. But it has happened with Star Wars. It's happened with Lord of the Rings. It's kind of like, yeah. But yeah, it's all right. The time of zombies will come back again in whatever 30 years. And then...
Yes, yeah. Cool. All right, so I had one thing that I wanted to talk with you about, and I've sent you a couple messages along these lines, but I have a video game recommendation for you, and I wanted to do this on air because I think this is a game that a number of our listeners might enjoy as well. So I have been playing this game called Tunic, Tunic, like the like the article of clothing. And so Tunic stars this little adorable fox character. If you take any look at it, you will see that it is very obviously Zelda inspired, right? So it's a game that is like inspired by like kind of classic top down Zelda adventure games, but you play as a little fox, and it also has a lot of like Dark Soulsy like combat elements to it as well. So this is like, I'm, yeah, this is your game, Andy.
I'm already sold. Like, I'll already be getting this game.
Yeah. But I will try not to spoil it too much, but it does, some really fascinating things with sort of like revealing mechanics to you throughout the game. So I ran into this phrase called, knowledge-based games recently, and these are the sorts of games where, like, once you sort of know what's going on, like, a lot of the game is unlocked for you, but a big part of the game is trying to figure out what's going on. So like you can think about this in terms of like maybe like Myst or, some of those point and click adventure games. If you know like if you've already figured out what, like how to solve each of those puzzles, you can just go and speed run it. You can just click through everything and you're done in 10 minutes. But right, like the whole part of the game is like learning how to do those things. But what Tunic does extremely well is like there's a couple things in the game that you learn at like these midway points in the game. So like it feels like it's almost 3 separate experiences, right? So you have like the Dark Souls combat stuff, and then something changes. You learn a little bit of information, and it like kind of opens up the world in front of you. In a way that it's just like, it's so clever. I don't want to give anything away if anyone's going to play it. But my recommendation, pretty strong recommendation to give that a try. I think you'd enjoy it quite a bit. And one part of it that you see really early on in the game, so I don't think this is a big spoiler, is that you collect pages of an instruction booklet as you're going through the game. So like this is old school. Like you remember NES, like that era of gaming, you'd get an instruction booklet with the game, and like that instruction booklet would actually give you information that you really needed that wouldn't be inside the game because there's no tutorial.
Yeah. Chris, were you the right age to like have grown up just poring over those things?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think I'm a little bit younger than you. Like I have vivid memories of like getting a game right before we went on a camping trip or something like that, and like being so bummed that I couldn't bring my Nintendo with me. Yeah. So I would just bring the instruction booklet and just read it cover to cover, like just over and over and over.
Yeah.
Right?
I've been there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so it really captures that mentality too, right? So I think it would not hit at all for, someone who's younger, quite a bit younger, who never did that. But
well, it just reminds me, I was playing a couple of years ago. I was playing and talking with you. I think I was playing, was it Super Metroid? Is that the Metroid that came out for the SNES? Anyway, I was playing Super Metroid, and because I did not have a instruction manual, I had trouble with the game, because I didn't realize, I don't remember exactly. I think there's a mechanic for like running really fast, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I didn't know that, and it wasn't something that I could just intuitively figure out just by pressing buttons. And so I just got stuck. I just hit a wall because there's sections of that game where you have to run fast. It's built into the puzzles and environments. And then at some point I Googled, or maybe I just talked to you, and it was like, oh, okay. Yes. All right. I had been like scouring the map, backtracking everywhere, trying to figure out like, what am I missing to get across that? Oh, I just need to press B and left at the same time. Got it. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Not a puzzle that they necessarily thought was going to be a puzzle. But
right.
Yeah, but nonetheless. So to tie this back to tabletop games, I think like, so to me, what this has me thinking about a lot is like, kind of like the layers that you can have in a story, right? So like it's, you can have the layers you can have in a story, and then especially with like handouts and stuff, like, I mean, I think if there's a way to like build into your game ways that your handouts or your props and stuff that you give to people, like the meaning of them kind of changes based on like information that they get later on. I think that can be a really cool moment, right? And I think I've certainly experienced this too, where it's like you are. My GM Matt does a really good job with props and stuff. Like, where like sometimes you're like, okay, now we have all this stuff, we need to kind of put it together and figure that out. So it's got my brain going a lot about like how might you do stuff like that in a tabletop game where it's like, oh, this piece of paper that I thought was just giving me one piece of information is actually giving me 2 or 3 throughout the game. So, all right,
that sounds great. I'm gonna have to play that partly just so that we can talk more specifically, even in private, if we don't want to spoil it for our listeners, about what you're talking about. Because I'm intrigued by the idea. I have to say, just from listening to you talk, I am having a hard time understanding what that experience would look like in a tabletop game. But I'm intrigued to find out more. So
Yeah, it's tough because like I don't want to say anything because it would just spoil a major part of it. Major part of it. But yeah, you'll have to give the game a try, and then we can talk privately about it. But
yeah, that sounds great. Okay, so all right, I'm going to play that, and listeners, you go play Tunic as well, and then we'll see you back here in 2 weeks. Right?
Yes, yeah. We'll say there's some really good accessibility options. So this is one thing that like we're totally diverged from tabletop games, but something that video games have been getting better about are like difficulty settings, I think. So like Tunic has a way to play the game where the combat difficulty is not as punishing as it might be otherwise. Right. And I think that can be a good thing. I think there's even a way you can play it where you actually can't die at all, which can be nice too. So if you just want to experience like the puzzles and the story and stuff like that, you don't have to necessarily also become, you don't necessarily have to get good as well on top of that. So.
Well, that is, we don't have to have a big discussion about this, but I've actually been thinking about accessibility in tabletop games lately. As is often the case, accessibility is one of those things that you don't really become an advocate for it until you yourself start getting inconvenienced in some way by it. And that's not great, but like it's just how people work, I guess. But for me, I like my eyesight isn't what it used to be. And man, I got a relatively new RPG the other day in a gorgeous like 400 page, full color hardcover book, and the font is so small. It gets so small. And
that's disappointing.
Like it's just like who did you not like just pass this to a couple of people to look at it before you sent it to print? Because I have a hard time. I mean, I'm not trying to. Feel free to play the world's smallest violin for me here. I will survive. But it did make me think. Accessibility in like written, printed tabletop games is not something I know much about. Now that I have bumped into my first accessibility issue, the prevalence of small print, I kind of want to educate myself about what it would mean for a rulebook to be really more fully accessible. So that is a whole fascinating topic. We should maybe try to find an expert or something who does accessibility and like knows about gaming as well. I don't know if there's any accessibility like gaming people out there. But I am sure there are. And if you're listening and you know who we should reach out and talk to, please let us know, because I would love to have that conversation.
Yeah, I think that'd be a really good conversation, because I think for me where this comes up is, so like when I have players that like have like ADHD or something like that, it's like, like there are for sure ways to play games. I think that can work better for people, right? And I think if you're like baseline, it's just like, oh no, the way to play games is everybody gets like this stack of books, everybody reads it exactly the same, has the same knowledge and everything. Like I think it doesn't work for a lot of people, and it's like, well, I mean, there's lots of ways to play games, and I think there's lots of ways we can bring people into the hobby as well, where it doesn't need to be this daunting process as well. Yeah, so I mean, if you feel like your eyesight is the thing that's stopping you from playing games, like that is like that's awful, right? Like we should we should be able to address that. So.
Yeah. Okay. Let's put a pin in this and plan on having this conversation when we find someone who knows more than we do about it. So.
Okay, cool. All right. So I'm going to roll under table real quick. We have got a couple minutes. I think we can talk about a topic.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So, yep.
All
right. I have rolled a 6.
A 6, Chris. The topic we will be discussing today is: what questions do long-term campaigns raise that RPG rulebooks do not address?
This is interesting.
And it might be a little challenging. Who among us has run a long-term campaign? Do you have a long-term campaign you can tell me about?
I don't have a long-term campaign like recently that I can tell you about. I've played in a few long-term campaigns that span multiple years. Right. So the gaming group that I'm with right now, like we've played a number of those sorts of campaigns, and then I ran. I mean, I'm sure longtime listeners are sick of hearing about it, but I ran a long-term lunchtime campaign as well. So I've got some stuff I think I can say about this. What about you? Like, when do you feel like is your last like long-term campaign that you?
Yeah, run? My last long-term campaign would be the Cthulhu one I'm running now. I wouldn't say it's exactly weekly. So there's sometimes gaps between games, but it's been running all year, and I think it has moved into the category of long-term campaign.
Yeah, I would say maybe that's a good thing to define real quick. Right, taking a page out of the Splat book. Like, let's define our terms here. But yeah, so I guess for me, long term is, well, it's obviously longer than like a one shot. I think this is anything where you're running a game sort of with the intention of telling a story beyond 3 to 5 sessions, right? It's not just like let's get together and play this thing real quick and move on to the next thing. It's like, oh, we're going to be in this world for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah,
for me, and I would add to that, like, long-term campaign is one where you expect kind of the character growth and development, mechanically speaking, as well as narratively, to be something that you are engaging with. I've run an awful lot. I've run and played in an awful lot of 3-session mini campaigns that kind of stop right at the point where, if we were to keep going, we would all take a minute and level up, or divvy out some experience points or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it too. Yeah, in D&D terms, it's anything where it's you're expecting to go from level whatever to another level by the time you're done. Because I think lately when I've run D&D, it's very much been you're going to be level whatever 5, right? And that's the extent of the conversation. It's not we're going to go from 5 to 10.
Well, I have to say one worry I have as we discuss this topic is that many times in my gaming life, I have said something like, man, why doesn't D&D have rules for blank? And then someone will be like, oh, it's actually in the Dungeon Master's Guide. And I'll be just completely called out as someone that has not read the Dungeon Master's Guide. Yeah. And so maybe 100% of anything I mention in this discussion has a whole chapter in the Dungeon Master's Guide that I will never see and never read. So.
Yeah, it's interesting though. I mean, I think with tabletop gaming in particular, at least in the style of the part of the hobby that we sort of exist in, I think there's this knowledge that you are not going to just stick with the books, right? There's going to be the reading blog posts and watching YouTube videos and listening to podcasts is sort of also part of everything. So part of me is well, okay, we're going to answer this question, and now we have addressed it, right? Now you have an answer for some of the long-term, long-term questions that campaigns bring up. But yeah, so I mean, I think maybe we could talk a little bit about some of the stuff that sort of hits with a long-term campaign. Yeah. After a little bit, that is somewhat more common things.
I can lob one out there right at the front. So by far, thinking of my Cthulhu game, by far the topic I have spent the most amount of time researching and trying to figure out and solve on my own has been, how do I keep track of all of this information over the long term? By far, that is not touched on in any rule book I've ever read. And I understand why it's a complicated thing to talk about, but I've spent, I don't know, hours and hours scouring the internet scouring Reddit threads and things like that for tips people have about what did they do that worked for them. And both specifically because, as we've talked before, I'm running Masks of Nyarlathotep, which has 10 trillion NPCs and 10 trillion clues. And so I mean, I have through my own efforts and not through any help from the rule book or anything else, have figured out a system that mostly works for me, that I don't love. It's pretty good, I guess. And I mean, what I need is for someone it doesn't even have to be in an RPG context, for someone to sit me down and just help me understand how human brains work, how we remember stuff, and what are, given my personality traits, what are going to be the best ways to just keep track of info. So I don't know. There's mine. I'm going to toss out there. Has nothing to do with any rules. Entirely to do with game management.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's where a lot of the problems sort of arise, honestly, with that, what information did I tell people, what's what's true, what's not, like what's been, like what have they done, like even right. And I think there's a lot of like software solutions to that are just like, unless that works for your brain, like just don't even bother.
I mean, that's what I've been doing. I've been trying every software solution out there, learning that the majority of them do not work with my brain, and then kind of ultimately settling on one that sort of does.
I think that's okay. I mean, that sounds like a success if you found.
I feel good about it. I'm not really complaining, but
have you ever played or read like a murder mystery, like one of those like murder mysteries in a box sorts of things?
I have. This is crazy, but I never have.
Maybe like next time we do like a Roll for Topicon or something, like maybe the night before we should do a murder mystery. I think one of those would be pretty fun to play with a bunch of role playing game people. But one thing that the ones that I've read before that they do that's pretty fascinating is like, so each person you get sort of a character when you walk into there, but they all like the format that I've seen is like you have sort of like these facts listed for your character, that's like during the first part of the evening, like this is the fact that you can tell people about, and then the next part of the evening is like the second fact, and like finally like there's a third round of it, right, and then it becomes sort of like obvious who's done it, and stuff. But like I'm like especially with something like with a long-term campaign, it's almost like you sort of want these like NPC cards where it's like you're almost checking off like I have revealed this information right about this person, and then you have them all sort of arrayed in front of you. But I mean, like just especially with Mass, like by the time you get to the end of that campaign, like there's just so many things going on. With so many different characters. Like, and I've played in that, and I'm sure we didn't even touch on everything that this that the story has to offer.
I feel like I have seen it once or twice in my life, like adventures that had like a little checkbox, published adventures that had a series of checkboxes that's like, these are the clues they can get in this scene, check off the ones they did. And that is like a very small step in a good direction. It's not really sufficient. It's not really sufficient, but it hints at like presenting the information in published adventures in a way that's kind of designed for like record keeping as well as just
it's I mean, I think like so each sort of GM, and I think game sort of needs to solve that for themselves. Another thing that like there's like two things that came up like reading this, like, so one is just the basic act of like scheduling. I think like I haven't really seen a rule book address scheduling stuff super well. Because, like, especially, like, when it gets down to, like, real-world stuff, like, so, like, there has been... So, I have two kids. Both kids were born during a Cthulhu-based campaign that I was playing in. Right? So, like... ill, but it does bode ill. So Matt is not allowed to run any more of those. But, like, so... I mean, like, there's, like, a very real-world thing that, like, when we started those campaigns, that wasn't necessarily going to happen, right? And then, like, so now all of a sudden, me as a player, like, I have to just be gone for a while, right? So, like, I think when you're playing these long-term campaigns, you have sort of these, like, real-life stuff that happens that can kind of take people in and out. Like, sometimes it's just the holidays and you can't get together for a few months, right? That is, I mean, it's the joke, right? That the real boss of any TTRPG is scheduling. But it's like such a real thing. And I think like when you're playing a long-term campaign, there can be this extra pressure on it of like, but if we can't schedule, like we can't finish the thing, right? So it's like, I mean, I think there's the scheduling part of it, then there's also the like sticking the landing part of it as well with a long-term campaign. And like, I think I haven't seen a lot of adventures or any adventures sort of give lots of good stopping points in the adventure of like, if your last session is going to happen halfway through the book, like this is how you could take it. Or like 3/4 of the book, like this is how it could end. Or like if you only have time for a one shot, like just do this part of it. Like that. And I think that's an opportunity for an adventure, like any sort of campaign to have some of those jumping off points or those conclusions built in.
So we've discussed, I do think that the biggest answers to this question are going to be those like questions related to the outside the game meta organization and planning parts. That's the hard part that like rule books haven't solved, and almost none of them really take a crack at solving them, which is fine. Are there like types of rules, like actual rules, where you have ever been in a game and you've been like, this would be so helpful if by now we had a system for figuring out this, that like, you know, like, so like, here's one. I don't know that this is a problem I have run into, but like, there are games out there that put some energy into like in between adventures downtime, right? Or like a game like Pendragon, which kind of has an elaborate system for, assumes you are adventuring for, you know, like once a year, and has an elaborate system for progressing your character through the rest of the year. I'm just curious, like, have you ever wished there were rules that just weren't there?
You know, not really. I'm relatively comfortable like making up rules, or like, you know, making a call to put at the table. So it's pretty rare that I'm like, oh, like I really wish there was a whole system design for this. There's definitely been many times, probably like once a session, where I'm like, I wish this book was laid out better. But like, that's just
right.
Like, that's just like, I mean, laying out a role playing game book is a difficult task. I think like for me, the things that arise are like, you know, it's almost like player specific stuff. It's like, hey, this player is really interested in this part of the system that no one else is, right? Like in like some of those like interpersonal dynamic things, those crop up the longer that you play with the same group, you know, especially in the same campaign, because it's like, well, I mean, like, what are you going to do? Like, if every time that there's a combat situation, like one person is trying to like everybody else has their weapons out, and one person is trying to like manipulate the guards to stand down. It's like, well, I mean, clearly like everybody wants to fight except for you, but I also like what you're trying. So like, what, you know, how do we negotiate that? Negotiate that well. And I feel like that is something that is, if there's anything addressed in a rule book, it's often just like a, you know, like, well, just like, you know, talk about it outside of the game. But it's like, well, I don't know, like maybe the game could offer some better paths forward for that too. Yeah,
I agree with you. It's also occurring to me, I wish that I wish that there were ways to kind of I don't know even how to word this, to build like a character's kind of I don't know, to show how they are interacting with the setting outside of adventures or in between adventures in a way that's like more detailed and meaningful than rolling on a few charts of like, did you get married? Was your business successful? That sort of thing, you know? And what I would love to see is, you know, like for each type of character, you know, like what are you doing? Like what are you doing that kind of cements your place in this setting that outside of adventuring? So whatever, if it's a sci-fi setting and you're a smuggler, right? A smuggler, that's a fun character class. It's probably super fun to play in adventures. So, but I would like, what's going on with that smuggling? Like, why are you a smuggler? You're not you're a smuggler because that's what you do before you got involved in this dumb adventure. So, like, let's, you know, what does that look like? Can we roll up some smuggling runs and some, like, can we montage our way through your real job, your day job, I guess. Like, that's the sort of system I would enjoy seeing. I don't know that, you know, I can't say that I'm a little bit in the land of, like, kind of just thinking up something that would be fun. I can't say I've ever needed this rule or this systems, but
yeah, I mean, it's clearly something you're thinking about, though. Like, yeah, you've brought it up, like, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. Like, I mean, even going back to the beginning of our conversation, like talking about The Walking Dead and like zombie games, it's like I think there's something to be said about those in between times, in between the action.
Yeah.
Right. And I think in a long-term campaign, you have more opportunities to do that. Whereas a one-shot, you might just be like we're just exploring the system or the space or the, you know, like the narrative, right, real quick, and then we're kind of in and out. Whereas with a long-term campaign, I think you can make some decisions about like, what did you smuggle? Who did you smuggle it for? Like, you know, what if we run into them 5 sessions from now? Like,
I mean, it's obviously great fodder for the GM to play with, you know, so.
Yeah. Well, we should wrap it up. I do want to say that you probably need to listen to the latest Splatbook episode.
Okay.
So Splatbook is our sister podcast. We're both part of the Roll For It Media podcasting network. They just had an episode about the 5e version of the Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
Yeah, Lord of the Rings tabletop game that Free League put out. And I was surprised at how positive they were about this system. But one thing that they mentioned is that it does have some really good rules for sort of your downtime, in that, like, if you need to take a long rest, like if you need to recover, you have to go to like Rivendell and spend months of like in-game time recovering. Like, just like when you're reading Lord of the Rings, right? Like when they're in Rivendell or Lothlorien, like, right, they're there for like a season.
Yeah.
You know, like, so it's similar to, it sounds like it's similar to Pendragon, where it's like real actual time passes when you need to do these activities. And like, so like that then there's a whole sort of like system in place for like, what do you do during that downtime activity? And like the one thing that they mentioned that stuck out to me was, like maybe you write a song for the whole time.
Oh, yeah.
The whole time you're there. It's like, I mean, yeah, talk about something that's like never going to come up in D&D other than like a bard making up a silly song.
Yeah.
You know,
but
like,
that's a huge part of the story to inspire D&D.
Yeah, it's a massive part of it. Like, yeah, like when they go and I'm sorry, I just read Fellowship, so this is like all very much in my mind, but like when they're in Rivendell for the first, like, yeah, in Rivendell, like Bilbo is there and he's just like sitting off in a corner for most of their time there, like thinking up a song.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And just writing it. And like he pulls Aragorn aside at some point and it's like, yeah, like help me out with this verse and stuff. And this is the sort of thing like, yeah, like if you are like, oh, we just fought a bunch of orcs, like we're taking a long rest and then we're going to get back to fighting some orcs. It's like, well, you know, what if it's, you have to go to Rivendell because like, yeah, you have gotten a mortal wound that you need to be healed of.
Oh yeah, totally.
So,
okay.
Anyway,
all right.
Yeah,
well,
go listen to
I didn't
Splatbook.
really need convincing. I'm a little behind on my Splatbook listening, but I was going to get to it. But I'm going to have to bump this up. And I did see some excited and nervous chatter about what was going to happen on that episode as they looked at a 5e book. Yes, so I'm pleased to hear it was a really productive conversation.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so go check them out at thesplatbook.com. Yeah, that's with John and Kyle. They are wonderful. All right, well, I think that does it for us. Yeah, so the next few episodes from us are going to be our annual holiday special event where we both build a dungeon and then play a dungeon live on air. So look forward to those. I think this episode's going to go live on Thanksgiving, and then we have sort of those two episodes to close out the year, and then we'll be back to our normal scheduled stuff in 2024, which is a real year that we are going to live through, and not a fake fantasy year. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, I've been Chris Alsman.
I've been Andy Rao.
Remember, if your players are having fun, you're a great GM.